The 34th day is a strange place to stand. It's far enough from the beginning that the shock has worn off, but not far enough for answers to have taken its place. 34 days of waiting. 34 days of questions that echo louder every night. 34 mornings waking up to the same reality. Someone is still missing, and when the person who disappears is a mother, the silence feels heavier, because mothers are anchors. They are routines. They are the voice that calls you in the morning, the person who remembers birthdays, the one who keeps the small details of a family stitched together. When a mother vanishes, it doesn't just leave an empty chair at the table. It leaves an entire family suspended in uncertainty. This is where the story of Savannah Guthrie's mother begins to unfold. Not in a dramatic movie scene, not under flashing lights, but in the slow, painful passage of time. 34 days ago, something happened. Something interrupted an ordinary life. And ever since that moment, a family has been living inside a question that refuses to be answered. Where is she? Think about what 34 days really means. It means 34 nights, where someone checks their phone one more time before going to sleep, hoping for a message that never arrives. 34 mornings where hope and fear wake up at the same time. 34 days of investigators retracing steps, neighbors replaying memories, and loved ones holding on to every tiny possibility that maybe, just maybe, today will be the day something changes. Missing person cases exist in a space that is different from almost every other tragedy. When someone dies, there is grief, but when someone disappears, there is uncertainty. And uncertainty can be even more painful than grief, because the mind begins to wander through every possibility, every road, every explanation. The questions multiply faster than the answers ever could. Did she leave willingly? Did something happen on the way somewhere? Did someone see something they didn't realize was important? Or is the truth hiding in plain sight, waiting for the one detail that will finally bring everything into focus? 34 days ago, Savannah Guthrie's mother stepped into what seemed like an ordinary moment in time. No one wakes up expecting that a normal day will become the start of a mystery. But that's the unsettling truth about disappearances. They rarely announce themselves. They arrive quietly. Sometimes it begins with a phone call that isn't answered. Sometimes it's a missed appointment. Sometimes it's a neighbor noticing that the lights have stayed off longer than usual. At first, people assume there must be a simple explanation. Maybe the phone battery died. Maybe plans changed. Maybe she just needed time. But as the hours stretch into days, and the days stretch into weeks, that comfortable explanation begins to fade. And worry takes its place. For Savannah, the waiting has now reached a point where every passing day carries a different weight. The first few days are filled with urgency. Search parties organize, flyers are printed, friends and strangers join together, hoping that someone, somewhere, saw something that can point the search in the right direction. Then comes the phase where the story begins spreading further. Local news stations pick it up. Communities share the information. People who have never met the missing person suddenly feel connected to the search, because everyone understands one simple truth. If it can happen to one family, it can happen to any family. And now, here we are. Day 34, a number that represents more than just time. It represents 34 days without answers. 34 days of investigators examining timelines, reviewing footage, analyzing every possible lead that might bring clarity to what happened. But cases like this often move slowly, not because people don't care, not because investigators aren't trying, but because mysteries are built from fragments. A sighting here, a phone record there, a moment caught on camera that suddenly changes the direction of the entire investigation. Some disappearances are solved quickly. Others take months, years, and sometimes the breakthrough comes from the most unexpected place. A stranger remembering something small. A detail that seemed meaningless at the time. A piece of information that finally connects the scattered pieces of the puzzle. Right now, somewhere in this story, that missing piece may already exist. Someone may have seen something on that day that didn't feel important. Someone may remember a car parked in an unusual place. Someone may recall a conversation that felt ordinary at the time. But in the context of a disappearance, ordinary moments can become critical clues. That is why stories like this continue to be told. Not simply to revisit the mystery, but to keep the search alive. Because the more people who hear the story, the greater the chance that someone will recognize something. And recognition can change everything. Behind every missing person case is a family living through a reality that most of us can barely imagine. A reality where every unknown number that calls your phone might bring news. A reality where every update from investigators carries the potential to change everything. But until that moment arrives, the waiting continues. And today, that waiting has reached day 34. Somewhere out there, the truth about what happened to Savannah Guthrie's mother exists. It exists in a timeline of events that has not yet been fully uncovered. It exists in details that may still be hidden. And it exists in the determination of people who refuse to let the search end with unanswered questions. Because every disappearance begins with a moment when someone who was part of the world suddenly isn't where they are supposed to be. And every investigation begins with the belief that the truth, no matter how complicated or painful, can eventually be found. 34 days ago, a mother vanished. 34 days later, the question remains the same. What really happened? The 34th day is a strange place to stand. It's far enough from the beginning that the shock has worn off, but not far enough for clarity to take its place. In the first hours after someone disappears, everything feels chaotic. Phones ring constantly. Family members rush from one place to another trying to piece together what happened. Every minute feels urgent, like the answer could arrive at any moment. But when the days begin to stack up, when one day becomes 5, then 10, then 20, the urgency transforms into something heavier. It becomes a slow, grinding uncertainty that follows every hour of every day. 34 days of waiting. 34 days of unanswered calls. 34 days of waking up each morning, hoping that something, anything, will finally make sense. When someone disappears, time begins to move in a way that feels different for everyone involved. For the outside world, days pass normally. Work continues. Traffic moves. People go about their routines. But for the family at the center of the mystery, time becomes something else entirely. Every hour is measured against the same question that refuses to go away. Where are they? And when the person who disappears is a mother, the absence becomes even more difficult to comprehend. Mothers are usually the center of daily life. They are the ones who remember the little details that keep everything moving smoothly. They are the ones who call to check in, who remind people about plans, who keep the rhythm of a household steady, even when everything else feels busy or unpredictable. So when that presence suddenly disappears, it doesn't just leave silence, it leaves confusion. Friends start asking questions. Neighbors begin noticing small changes. A routine that once felt ordinary suddenly feels incomplete. 34 days ago, Savannah Guthrie's mother stepped into what seemed like a normal day. There was no warning that anything unusual was about to happen. Most disappearances begin that way. They start quietly, in the middle of moments that seem completely ordinary. Someone leaves home, expecting to run a quick errand. Someone plans to meet a friend. Someone goes out for a walk or a drive. Nothing about the moment feels significant at the time. But later, that ordinary moment becomes the point where everything begins to unravel. At first, the absence may not seem alarming. Maybe a call goes unanswered. Maybe a message isn't returned right away. People assume there must be a simple explanation. Phones die. Plans change. Sometimes people just get busy. But as hours pass, the concern begins to grow. Someone checks again. Someone tries calling one more time. Someone decides to drive by a place they expected her to be. And slowly the realization begins to settle in that something is not right. That moment, the moment when worry replaces assumption, is often the beginning of a missing person case. From that point forward, every detail becomes important. People start retracing steps. They ask questions about the last place she was seen. They try to build a timeline from the smallest pieces of information. When was the last phone call? Who spoke to her last? Where was she planning to go? Investigators look for patterns in those details, because most mysteries, no matter how confusing they appear at first, eventually begin to reveal structure. A timeline forms, movements are traced, locations are examined. But in the early days of a disappearance, answers rarely appear quickly. Instead, what appears first are possibilities. And possibilities can lead the mind in many different directions. Maybe she left willingly. Maybe she planned to go somewhere quietly. Maybe she needed time alone. Or maybe something happened unexpectedly. An accident. An encounter. A moment where circumstances changed suddenly and without warning. These possibilities circle around every conversation during the early stages of a search. Family members replay their last interactions again and again. They analyze every word they remember, every tone of voice, every small detail that might help explain what happened. But memory is rarely perfect, and uncertainty can make even the clearest memories feel incomplete. By the time a case reaches the 34th day, the search has already passed through several phases. The first phase is driven by urgency and hope. Flyers appear on street corners. Photos are shared across social media. Friends, volunteers, and local communities come together, hoping that someone will recognize a face or remember seeing something important. The second phase is quieter, but just as intense. Investigators begin focusing on evidence. Phone records may be examined. Security footage might be reviewed. Witnesses are interviewed again to clarify small details that could reshape the timeline. During this time, even the smallest piece of information can become incredibly valuable. A car spotted on a quiet road. A brief conversation with a stranger. A moment captured by a camera that no one noticed before. These fragments are the building blocks of an investigation. They may not seem important on their own, but together they can begin to reveal patterns. And sometimes the breakthrough comes from the most unexpected place, a person who remembers something weeks later. A detail that seemed ordinary at first, but suddenly feels different in the context of a disappearance. That is why missing person stories continue to circulate long after the first headlines fade. Every time the story is shared, it reaches someone new. And that new person might hold the one piece of information that connects the remaining gaps. 34 days may feel like an eternity for the family waiting for answers, but in the world of investigations, it is still a moment when possibilities remain open. Some cases are solved quickly. Others take months. Sometimes the answers are hidden inside details that have already been discovered, but not yet understood. Somewhere within the timeline of Savannah Guthrie's mother's disappearance, there is a sequence of events that explains what happened that day. It exists in the path she took, the places she visited, and the moments that followed after she was last seen. Those moments are out there somewhere. They exist in memories. They exist in records. They exist in the small fragments of information that investigators continue to examine piece by piece. And as each day passes, the search continues to move forward through those fragments, trying to bring the full picture into view. Think about what 34 days really means. It means 34 nights where someone stares at their phone a little longer before putting it down, hoping that the screen will suddenly light up with a message that explains everything. 34 nights of silence that feels heavier than it should. 34. Your nights where sleep doesn't come easily, because the mind keeps replaying the same questions again and again. And then there are the mornings. 34 mornings where hope and fear wake up at the same time. For most people, mornings bring routine. Alarm clocks ring, coffee brews. The day begins with familiar tasks. But when someone you love is missing, mornings feel different. The first thought that appears is the same thought that was there before sleep finally came. Maybe today there will be news. Maybe today something will change. Families living through a disappearance often describe mornings as the hardest part of the day, because every new day brings the realization that the mystery is still unresolved. The absence is still there. The questions remain exactly where they were the day before. 34 days also means 34 days of investigators working quietly behind the scenes. While families wait for answers, detectives and search teams are moving through a careful process. They examine timelines, revisit locations, and review every piece of information connected to the last known moments before the disappearance. One of the most important parts of any investigation is establishing the timeline. Investigators begin by asking a series of very precise questions. When was the last confirmed sighting? Who spoke to her last? What time did that conversation happen? Where was she planning to go next? Each of these details becomes a marker on a timeline that investigators slowly build step by step. The goal is to understand not just where someone was, but what happened between each moment. Because somewhere between the last confirmed sighting and the moment someone is reported missing, something changed. Sometimes the timeline reveals clear clues. A phone may have connected to a tower in a different location. A security camera might show a V in pickle passing through an intersection. A witness might remember seeing someone at a specific place and time. But in many cases, the timeline begins with gaps, empty spaces where information should exist but doesn't yet. Those gaps are where investigators focus their attention, because filling in even one missing piece can shift the direction of the entire case. 34 days also means 34 days of a community slowly becoming aware of the story. At first, the search often stays close to the family and their immediate circle. Friends share photos. Neighbors keep an eye out for anything unusual. But as time passes, the story spreads further. Local news stations begin covering the disappearance. People in nearby towns start recognizing the name. Social media posts reach individuals who may have never met the missing person but suddenly feel connected to the search. Every new person who hears the story becomes another pair of eyes looking for something that might matter. Another memory waiting to surface, another chance that someone will say, "I think I saw something," because that happens more often than people realize. A person might see a news story weeks later and suddenly remember passing a car parked on the side of a road. Someone might recall a brief interaction that seemed completely normal at the time, but now feels worth mentioning. 34 days can feel like a long time for the family living through the uncertainty. But in investigations, time often works in complicated ways. Sometimes the first few days produce very little information, and then, weeks later, a single detail appears that changes everything investigators thought they understood about the case. That is why every day still matters. Every memory still matters. Every observation still matters, because somewhere inside the events of those 34 days, the truth about what happened is waiting to be uncovered.